On December 15, 2009, in a quiet Atlanta neighborhood, Angela Matthews opened her door to a visitor she should have turned away. What began as an innocent exchange with the neighbor's son quickly spiraled into a web of secrets that no one in the tight-knit community could have anticipated. By the time the truth surfaced, blood had already been spilled, and the life of one housewife would become a cautionary tale etched in whispers across the block. Angela Angie Matthews was a strikingly beautiful 38-year-old woman married to Marcus Matthews, a successful businessman who spent most of his time away from home. Their marriage from the outside appeared perfect: nice house, expensive cars, and a life of luxury. But beneath the surface, Angie felt an emptiness that no amount of wealth could fill. That afternoon, while Marcus was away on another business trip, Angie found herself drawn to Jamal Thompson, the 22-year-old son of her neighbor. Jamal had grown up next door, a bright, ambitious young man with a promising future. Over the years, Angie had watched him mature from a boy into a man, and something about his youthful energy and charm stirred something in her that she hadn't felt in years. It started innocently enough: a smile, a lingering glance, a casual conversation by the fence that separated their homes. But on that December day, the attraction that had been brewing between them boiled over. Jamal visited Angie's home under the pretense of helping her fix a broken faucet. One thing led to another, and before long they found themselves in each other's arms, crossing a line they both knew they shouldn't. Their affair began in secret, fueled by the thrill of the forbidden. Whenever Marcus was away, Angie would invite Jamal over, using the privacy of her home as a sanctuary for their stolen moments. The excitement of sneaking around, the danger of being caught, only made their encounters more intoxicating. They convinced themselves that no one would ever know, that they were careful enough to keep their secret hidden. But they were wrong. By February 2, 2010, the affair had been going on for nearly 2 months. Angie and Jamal had become more reckless, more daring. The fear of being caught only added to the excitement, pushing them to take greater risks. They met at odd hours even during the day, relying on Marcus's frequent absences to cover their tracks. That morning, Marcus was supposed to be in Chicago for a business meeting. Angie, confident that she had the day to herself, invited Jamal over as usual. They spent hours together, losing themselves in the intensity of their relationship. But what they didn't know was that Marcus had wrapped up his meeting early and decided to surprise his wife by coming home ahead of schedule. At 2:45 p.m., Marcus pulled into the driveway. Angie and Jamal were upstairs, completely unaware of his presence. As Marcus entered the house, he called out for Angie, his voice echoing through the quiet halls. Angie's heart nearly stopped when she heard his voice. Panic set in as she realized the danger they were in. She frantically pushed Jamal out of bed, urging him to hide. Jamal, half-dressed and shaken, barely had time to slip out of the bedroom and into the adjacent bathroom. Marcus, oblivious to the tension in the air, made his way upstairs, calling Angie's name. Angie quickly pulled herself together, forcing a smile as she met Marcus in the hallway. She made up a story about taking a nap, hoping he wouldn't notice the disheveled state of the bedroom behind her. Marcus, tired from his trip, didn't press her for details. He kissed her on the cheek and headed to the bathroom to freshen up. Angie's heart raced as she realized Jamal was still hiding in there. But luck was on their side. Marcus decided to use the guest bathroom downstairs instead. As soon as he was out of sight, Angie whispered for Jamal to leave through the back door. Jamal slipped out, narrowly avoiding being caught, but the close call left them both rattled. After that day, Angie knew they had to be more careful. The thrill was still there, but now it was tinged with fear. Yet, despite the danger, neither of them could bring themselves to end the affair. They were addicted to the rush, to the way they made each other feel, and so they continued their meetings. More secretive, their actions more reckless. On February 20, 2010, their luck began to run out. Mrs. Jenkins, the elderly woman who lived across the street, had always been known as the neighborhood busybody. Nothing happened on that block without her knowing, and she had begun to notice the strange comings and goings at the Matthews house. That afternoon, she saw Jamal sneaking into Angie's home, his eyes darting around as if he were afraid of being seen. Mrs. Jenkins, suspicious by nature, watched from her window, her curiosity piqued. Later that evening, as she chatted with another neighbor, she casually mentioned what she had seen. Gossip spread quickly in their tight-knit community, and it wasn't long before the rumors reached Patrice Thompson, Jamal's mother. Patrice, a deeply religious woman with high hopes for her son, was alarmed by the whispers. She confronted Jamal that night, demanding to know what was going on. Jamal, caught off guard, denied everything. He insisted that Mrs. Jenkins must have been mistaken, that there was nothing going on between him and Angie. But the seed of doubt had already been planted in Patrice's mind. She didn't believe her son was telling the whole truth, but she had no proof, just the word of an old woman known for her gossip. Despite his denial, Jamal couldn't shake the fear that his secret was no longer safe. The walls were closing in, and the affair that had once been a thrilling escape now felt like a ticking time bomb, ready to explode at any moment. But neither Jamal nor Angie could have predicted just how devastating that explosion would be. On the evening of March 5, 2010, the air in the Matthews home was heavy with tension. Angela Matthews had been wrestling with guilt for weeks, the weight of her affair with Jamal Thompson becoming too much to bear. She had decided that it was time to end things with Jamal, knowing that continuing the relationship could only lead to more trouble. But as she prepared to break the news to him, she had no idea how explosive the situation would become. Around 7 p.m., Angie invited Jamal over under the pretense of a usual meeting. But this time, instead of the passionate embrace he expected, Jamal was met with a somber Angela. She told him that their affair had to end, that it was becoming too risky, and that they both needed to move on. Jamal, who had grown increasingly attached to Angie, felt his world crashing down around him. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. After everything they had been through, she was just going to throw it all away? Jamal's initial shock quickly turned to anger. He accused Angie of using him, of playing with his emotions. Angie, trying to stay calm, explained that it wasn't like that, but Jamal wasn't listening. His desperation began to show, his voice rising as he pleaded with her not to end things. But Angie remained firm, telling him that it was over and he needed to leave. The argument escalated rapidly. Jamal, feeling cornered and rejected, became more aggressive. He grabbed Angie's arm, pulling her close as he continued to plead, but she pulled away, demanding that he leave immediately. In a fit of rage, Jamal shoved her away from him. Angie, caught off balance, stumbled backward toward the staircase. The next few seconds happened in slow motion. Jamal reached out to grab her, but it was too late. Angie lost her footing and fell backward down the stairs, her body tumbling violently before landing in a crumpled heap at the bottom. The house fell eerily silent. Jamal stood frozen at the top of the stairs, his heart pounding in his chest as he stared down at Angie's lifeless body. Panic set in as he realized what had just happened. He rushed down the stairs, calling her name, but there was no response. Angie was gone, her neck twisted at an unnatural angle, her eyes staring blankly ahead. The fall had been fatal, and there was nothing he could do to bring her back. Terrified, Jamal fled the scene, leaving Angie's body where it lay. He ran back to his own house, his mind racing with fear and regret. He knew he had to get out of there, but he had no idea where to go or what to do. All he knew was that he had killed the woman he claimed to love, and now his life was in ruins. The next morning, on March 6, 2010, Marcus Matthews returned home from another business trip. He entered the house expecting to find Angie waiting for him as usual, but instead, he was met with an unsettling silence. He called out her name, but there was no answer. As he moved through the house, a sense of dread began to build inside him. Something wasn't right. It wasn't until he reached the bottom of the stairs that he saw her. Angie's body lay motionless on the floor, her limbs splayed out in a way that immediately told Marcus something was terribly wrong. His breath caught in his throat as he rushed to her side, frantically checking for a pulse, but she was cold to the touch. Panic set in as he dialed 911, his hands trembling as he tried to explain what he had found. Within minutes, the police arrived, along with paramedics who quickly confirmed what Marcus already knew: Angie was dead. The scene was chaotic as officers began to assess the situation, but amid the commotion, one person remained calm and focused: Detective Bryant. He was a seasoned investigator, and as he examined the scene, Something about it didn't sit right with him. Angie's position, the angle of her fall, the injuries she sustained, it all seemed too deliberate, too violent to be a simple accident. On March 8, 2010, the investigation into Angie's death began in earnest. Marcus was the first to be questioned, and he was devastated. He recounted his last conversation with Angie, describing her as happy and healthy. He couldn't understand how this could have happened. The police pressed him for details about their marriage, but Marcus insisted that they had no major problems. He was a man who loved his wife, and the idea that someone could have hurt her was too much for him to bear. As the police canvassed the neighborhood, they spoke to several residents, including Mrs. Jenkins, who had always been quick to share any information she had. Mrs. Jenkins told the officers about the frequent visits she had noticed between Jamal and Angie. She had seen Jamal entering the Matthews house on multiple occasions, often when Marcus was out of town. To her, it was clear that something was going on between them. This information piqued Detective Bryant's interest. He began to dig deeper into the relationship between Jamal and Angie, suspecting that there was more to the story than met the eye. The following day, March 12, 2010, Jamal was brought in for questioning. Nervous and on edge, he tried to maintain his composure, but it was clear that the pressure was getting to him. He denied any involvement in Angie's death, claiming that he hadn't seen her in days, but his story didn't add up, and his alibi was shaky at best. Detective Bryant observed Jamal closely during the interrogation. His nervous demeanor, the way he avoided certain questions, it all pointed to someone with something to hide. The detective wasn't convinced by Jamal's denials, and he suspected that there was more to the story. As the investigation continued, Patrice Thompson became increasingly worried. She knew her son better than anyone, and she could tell that something was weighing heavily on him. She tried to get him to open up, to tell her what was going on, but Jamal remained tight-lipped. He was scared, and he knew that the noose was tightening around him. On March 20, 2010, the breakthrough came. Forensic evidence from the scene, meticulously gathered and analyzed, began to paint a clearer picture of what had happened that night. Jamal's fingerprints were found on the stair railing, confirming that he had been in the house. But the most damning evidence came in the form of text messages recovered from Angie's phone. Messages exchanged between her and Jamal that revealed the nature of their relationship and the argument they had on the night of her death. With this new evidence in hand, the police had enough to move forward. Jamal was arrested at his home that afternoon, the gravity of the situation finally sinking in as he was handcuffed and led away. He was charged with second-degree murder, accused of causing Angie's death in the heat of the moment. As Jamal was taken into custody, the reality of what he had done began to set in. The affair that had once been a source of excitement and passion had now destroyed everything. Angie was dead, Marcus was left to grieve the loss of his wife, and Jamal faced a future behind bars. The neighborhood buzzed with the news. The whispers and gossip that had started months ago were now reaching a fever pitch. The secrets that had been hidden behind closed doors were now laid bare for all to see, and the consequences were devastating. By April 15, 2010, the city of Atlanta was buzzing with talk of the Matthews-Thompson trial. It wasn't just another case, it was the kind of story that people whispered about in grocery store lines and on front porches. A scandal involving a housewife, her young lover, and a tragic death that rocked a tight-knit black community. The courthouse was packed that day with people eager to see how it all unfolded. The prosecution came out strong, led by Assistant District Attorney Carla Henderson, who had a reputation for being tough and relentless. She opened with the facts, laying out the timeline of events that led to Angela's death. The prosecution's case was built on forensic evidence, including Jamal's fingerprints on the stair railing, the text messages between him and Angie, and the bruising on her arms that indicated a struggle. Henderson painted a picture of a young man who couldn't handle rejection, who let his anger get the best of him, and who ultimately caused the death of a woman he claimed to love. On April 16, 2010, the neighbors took the stand, one after another, recounting what they had seen and heard in the months leading up to Angie's death. Mrs. Jenkins was first, her voice steady as she described seeing Jamal sneaking into the Matthews house late at night, often when Marcus was away. She spoke about the rumors that had swirled around the neighborhood, rumors that everyone had heard but no one wanted to believe. Her testimony was damaging, further solidifying the prosecution's argument that the affair had been a well-known secret. Marcus Matthews testified on April 18, 2010. He walked to the stand with a heavy heart, the grief of losing his wife still raw. As he spoke, his voice wavered, but he remained composed. He talked about his marriage to Angie, how things had been good in the beginning but had started to fall apart over time. He admitted that they had grown distant, that he had been working more and more, and that they had stopped communicating like they used to. But even with the cracks in their marriage, Marcus insisted he had no idea Angie was having an affair until the police investigation began. He spoke of his love for his wife and his shock at finding her lifeless body. The defense, led by attorney Jonathan Reed, argued that the affair was indeed a tragic mistake, but not a crime. On April 20, 2010, Patrice Thompson, Jamal's mother, took the stand to testify on behalf of her son. She was a proud, strong woman, but as she sat before the jury, she was visibly shaken, with tears in her eyes. She described Jamal as a good boy who had never been in trouble before. She talked about how hard it had been for him growing up without a father, how she had done her best to raise him right. Patrice pleaded with the jury to see her son not as a criminal, but as a young man who had made a terrible mistake in a moment of anger and confusion. On April 23, 2010, the defense presented their argument that Angie's death was not murder, but an accident. Reed argued that Jamal had never intended to harm her, that the fall was a tragic result of a heated argument that spiraled out of control. He pointed out that Jamal had tried to stop her from falling, that he had been devastated by what happened, and that he had not premeditated any of it. But the prosecution wasn't swayed, insisting that the evidence showed a crime of passion driven by jealousy and desperation. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury reached a verdict on May 10, 2010. The courtroom was tense as everyone awaited the decision. The jury found Jamal Thompson guilty of involuntary manslaughter. It was a lesser charge than the second-degree murder he had initially been accused of, but it still carried a significant penalty. Jamal was sentenced to 15 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 10 years. As the sentence was read, Patrice broke down in tears, her cries echoing through the courtroom. Jamal, now shackled, hung his head, the weight of his actions and the loss of his freedom crashing down on him. The aftermath of the trial was devastating for everyone involved. On June 5, 2010, Marcus Matthews made the difficult decision to sell the house where he and Angie had lived for so many years. The memories were too much for him to bear, the laughter, the arguments, and the tragedy that had shattered his world. He couldn't stay in the neighborhood where everyone knew his story, where the whispers and pitying glances followed him everywhere he went. So, Marcus packed up his belongings and moved away, hoping to find some peace and start over in a place where no one knew his name. For Patrice, the loss was twofold. She had not only lost her son to the prison system but also the respect and privacy she had once cherished. Her once active presence in the community faded as she became more reclusive, the weight of Jamal's actions heavy on her heart. Neighbors who once greeted her warmly now avoided eye contact, unsure of what to say. The vibrant, close-knit community was left fractured, the scandal a constant reminder of how quickly things could fall apart. In the end, the affair that was supposed to be a secret passion became a deadly obsession. But this is nothing compared to the case where the housewife had an affair with the neighbor's daughter, which ended in horrible drama. The unending family and neighborhood drama continues, so give it a watch and subscribe for more.